Welcome to this explainer. Okay, we are about to unpack the grueling, awe-inspiring, and, frankly, marathon journey of a medical student at India's premier medical institute, AIIMS. We're looking directly at their institutional syllabus to map out exactly what it takes to forge a highly qualified physician. We're talking about one of the absolute longest, most unrelenting educational gauntlets out there, 5.5 demanding years of intense academic and clinical pressure. So let's walk through every major milestone of this monumental undertaking. You know, what's really wild is tracing this mammoth syllabus all the way back to its prestigious roots in 1946. That's right, the Bohr Committee. Long before the institute was even formally established in 1956, there was this incredibly profound vision. The goal? To build a magnificent national medical center that would pump out a steady, elite stream of medical professionals for a newly independent country. And that exceptionally high standard set decades ago, it absolutely still dictates the intense, drawn-out rigor of the curriculum you see today. Here's our roadmap for this massive AIIMS MBBS journey. We're going to hit Phase 1, Preclinical Foundations. Then Phase 2, Paraclinical Studies. Move right into Phase 3, Clinical Practice, look at evaluation and assessment, and finally, the ultimate medical goal. This timeline brilliantly lays out the progressive complexity and the sheer, exhausting length of the program. It spans 4.5 years of pure academics, starting with the preclinical phase in semesters 1 and 2, moving to paraclinical in 3 through 5, and hitting the clinical phase in semesters 6 to 9. But wait, graduation isn't the end. This is immediately followed by a grueling 1-year compulsory rotatory internship. This final year strips away the safety net of the classroom entirely. Interns are thrown directly into relentless shifts, applying everything they've learned to real patients in real time before they can finally earn that degree.
All right, Phase 1, Preclinical Foundations. This covers semesters 1 and 2, and it forms the absolute bedrock of medical knowledge.
Get a load of this number, 541. That is 541 teaching hours dedicated solely to anatomy. And that's just in the very first year. This single number really highlights the massive, marathon-level scale of effort required literally from day one. You aren't just sitting back in a lecture hall. This encompasses 38 hours of theory and a staggering 349 hours of hands-on practical dissections for gross anatomy alone. Imagine standing over a cadaver for hundreds upon hundreds of hours, meticulously mapping every single nerve, vessel, and muscle fiber until the human body becomes second nature. And that intense focus makes total sense, because the anatomy curriculum is incredibly vast. Students aren't just memorizing bones here. They are diving deep into microanatomy to identify the microscopic structures that make biological life possible. They study embryology to trace human development from conception to birth. They're exploring human genetics to catch chromosomal aberrations, and they have to map out the insanely complex wiring of neuroanatomy to truly understand how the brain commands the body. It is a massive undertaking. Alongside all that anatomy, biochemistry is brought in to teach the chemical mechanisms of the body. It's like looking under the hood at a molecular level. It's a huge shift. For instance, they don't just learn what sickle cell anemia looks like, they learn the exact microscopic molecular substitution in hemoglobin that causes those red blood cells to distort and clog blood vessels. They study the precise chemical mechanics driving a muscle contraction, and they decode the metabolic failures behind inherited disorders. Then, physiology steps in to bring that anatomy and chemistry to life. It's all about the functional mechanics of the body. This subject systematically progresses from general nerve and muscle energetics all the way through the fluid dynamics of blood and respiration. It covers the heavy lifting of the cardiovascular and GI systems, and finally tackles complex neurophysiology. Think about it. These students have to understand the exact electrical pathways that govern not just movement, but human learning, memory retention, and even the regenerative mechanisms of sleep. So, having spent the longest time mastering the complex baseline of the healthy human body in those first 2 semesters, students finally cross a major threshold. They transition into semesters 3 through 5, entering the diagnostic sciences. This marks a profound psychological shift. You know, they are no longer just studying how the body works, they are now studying how it breaks, how it fails, and how it gets compromised by external forces. Which brings us to Phase 2, Paraclinical Studies, covering semesters 3 to 5. The focus now shifts entirely to disease and diagnostics. During this phase, students encounter some absolutely fascinating microdetails in forensic medicine and toxicology. They learn the intricacies of medical legal autopsies, essentially learning how to read a body for criminal evidence. They're trained to identify highly specific toxicological poisonings, like differentiating between types of snakebite and venomation. They even learn procedures like the diatom test. This is mind-blowing. Forensics actually look for microscopic algae called diatoms deep inside bone marrow to definitively prove if a victim actually drowned in water or was placed there after the fact.
Think of pathology and microbiology as the ultimate diagnostic detective toolkit for the student. Microbiology teaches them all about the microscopic invaders, the bacteria, viruses, and protozoan parasites, and exactly how they infiltrate the host. Meanwhile, pathology teaches them the aftermath. It's the study of how to identify the actual microscopic cellular injury and the systemic havoc these infective agents wreak upon human tissues. Now, once you understand the disease and the damage, you need to know exactly how to fix it, right? Enter pharmacology. This grounds students in the precise mechanisms of therapeutic drugs. They have to master pharmacokinetics. Basically, imagine tracking the complete life cycle of a chemical from the exact second a pill is swallowed, to how it's distributed in the bloodstream, how the liver metabolizes it, and finally, how it's eliminated. It's the core principles of how chemicals actively alter bodily functions to fight illness. The curriculum brilliantly bridges the micro and the macro here. In pathology, students start by zooming way in on general pathology, understanding basic cellular necrosis, inflammation, and genetics. But then they quickly zoom out into systemic pathology, where they learn to diagnose complex, large-scale, organ-specific diseases across the cardiovascular, respiratory, and gastrointestinal systems. It's the direct bridge from looking through a tiny microscope to treating an actual whole person. Next up, Phase 3, clinical practice, spanning semesters 6 through 9. The theory ends and the real hospital work begins. At this critical, high-stress stage, the quiet aesthetic of the lecture hall completely disappears into the fast-paced reality of the hospital environment. Students begin rotating through various intensive medical specialties. They are directly applying years of textbook knowledge to living, breathing patients who require immediate and sometimes life-saving care. The days are incredibly long, and the stakes couldn't possibly be higher.
And keep in mind, surgery isn't just one monolithic subject here. It's a massive, multifaceted umbrella. Students are trained in general surgery, handling open wounds and acute abdomens. But imagine the mental whiplash. 1 month, they're in orthopedics, dealing with shattered bones and severe trauma. The next, they dive into the microscopic precision of ophthalmology to treat cataracts. They learn delicate ENT procedures and then suddenly transition to managing high-stress emergency airway resuscitations and anesthesiology. The breadth of skill required is just staggering.
Simultaneously, the massive medicine blocks require students to manage an incredibly wide spectrum of human suffering. Put yourself in the shoes of a 20-something student. One morning, you're tasked with understanding neonatal sepsis in a premature infant, and by the afternoon, you're dealing with childhood malnutrition. They manage chronic adult diseases, acute heat strokes, and specific poisonings. Plus, they rotate through psychiatry to navigate deeply complex mental health disorders. The immense mental and emotional endurance required to get through this is truly extraordinary.
But wait, these future doctors aren't just trained for the individual patient in a hospital bed. They are trained for the entire population. Community medicine requires them to zoom out and look at public health on a macro level. They master epidemiology and biostatistics. They learn how to implement massive national health programs for family welfare, immunization, and tuberculosis control. They study environmental health and learn exactly how to measure and mitigate the actual burden of disease across totally diverse demographic communities.
Section 4. Evaluation and Assessment. How do they ensure those world-class standards are actually met? To make it through this incredibly long program, students face a brutal, unyielding, dual grading system. It places an equal 50% weights on daily internal assessment, meaning continuous clinical, practical, and ward evaluations throughout the semesters. The other 50% relies on massive, high-pressure, end-of-phase, summative professional exams. Think about the psychological pressure of that. You absolutely cannot just coast and then cram at the end of the year. You have to perform perfectly on the wards under the eyes of senior doctors every single day because every single day counts. The tracking is unbelievably meticulous. In a vast subject like medicine, scores are aggregated precisely across 5 different long semesters. Every single clinical rotation, every patient case presentation, and every minor ward interaction is scored, recorded, and tracked for years.
The institute leaves absolutely zero room for gaps in clinical competency.
So all 5.5 years of this grueling marathon study, the hundreds of hours in the anatomy lab, the intense clinical rotations, the relentless assessments, it all culminates in these specific goals. AIIMS aims to produce physicians who can seamlessly diagnose common and rare health problems using strict evidence-based medicine. But beyond that, they must practice with profound ethics and possess an unwavering attitude for lifelong self-learning in a field that evolves literally every single day.
Looking back at the sheer, overwhelming scale of this curriculum, from the microscopic mapping of human genetics all the way to managing massive population-level disease control over 5.5 years, you really have to ask yourself, could you withstand the mental endurance and unyielding dedication required to survive what is undoubtedly one of the longest, most rigorous medical gauntlets in the world?